distinguished guests, dear visitors, welcome. In today's session, we will discuss multinational cooperation beyond Earth, X-3 mission experience. Please join me welcoming Mr. Tuva Cihangir Atasever, X-3 Reserve Crew member. Joining the discussion, the X-3 mission crew, Mr. Michael Lopez Alegria, Vice President of IAF and X-3 mission commander. Mr. Michael Lopez, Colonel Walter Villaday of the Italian Air Force. Mr. Alper Gezer, Turkey's first astronaut representing the Turkish Space Agency. And Mr. Marcus Wundt of the European Space Agency.
All right, gentlemen, my dear space brothers, welcome to Istanbul, Turkey. It is our great honor and privilege to host you here. Before we start our panel, I would love to begin by briefly, really quickly reminding why AX-3 was such a historic mission, right? Why it was such a historic milestone. So, Axiom Mission 3 was Axiom Space's third human spaceflight mission to the International Space Station, but it was also the first all-European astronaut mission to the International Space Station. So it brought together a truly multinational crew, which you just met here. Our commander, Michael Lopez Alegria, representing United States and Spain. Our pilot, Walter Villaday, representing Italy. Our first ever astronaut, Alper Gezer, representing Turkey. And also Marcus Wundt, our mission specialist, second mission specialist, representing Sweden and ESA. So it was a truly multinational and international multi-agency collaboration amongst many parties. So this mission was a result of a 9 months long training in a highly international setting. So we mainly trained at NASA's Johnson Space Center. We spent most of our time in Building 9 and the mock-ups, which was my favorite part, right? That was my happy place, if you will. And a lot of training happened at SpaceX facilities in Los Angeles, in California, and also in Kennedy Space Center in Florida. ESA's European Astronaut Center in Cologne, that's Marcus's turf, and we spent some time over there to get some training on Columbus module, what kind of operations can be conducted on board Columbus. And then we had a training at JAXA Scuba training center, astronaut training center, to get the same kind of training for Kibo module, what Japan owns on board ISS. Then we had this survival training at Pacific Northwest. That was good times, right? We spent a good week trying to survive in the wilderness and also bond as a crew. That was an interesting experience. And also, we had a lot of training at Axiom Space's facilities in Houston, Texas. So it was a 9 months long, truly international training campaign. After our training flow, the crew launched on January 18th, 2024 on a Falcon 9 rocket and docked to the ISS roughly after 36 hours. And if I'm not mistaken, that is the still longest uphill, right, to the International Space Station. So they broke a record just launching and connecting with the International Space Station. And they spent 18 days on board ISS working and living. During your time while you were in space, you completed 346 Earth orbits, almost 15 million kilometers. That's a lot of mileage, right? If it was a airline program, you would be gold members, right, for that. And full spaceflight duration was nearly 22 days, and then the crew splashed down on February 9th off the coast of Florida. And your return was also another record, right? 48 hours. So during the streams, Dragon capsule might look like a spacious thing, but it really is a tiny volume for spending 48 hours with 4 individuals. So they became really good friends after that. And during the mission, the crew completed 54 research activities, including 39 of them being on board International Space Station. And the crew, while on board, carried out 28 different media and outreach engagements. So, in a nutshell, AX-3 mission advanced research in human physiology, in neuroscience, in plant physiology, microalgae behavior in space, cancer organoid behavior under microgravity conditions, robotic and future exploration, space infrastructure. So today's panel, dear guests, is not about one mission, but it's really about how different nations, agencies, international industry partners, and astronauts can collaborate to improve life here on Earth. So, on that note, I would like to ask LA your first question, if I may. So, throughout your career, throughout your long career, you have flown under different human spaceflight missions and also structures, right? You flew with NASA's Space Shuttle first, then you flew with Soyuz as well, in a Soyuz ISS expedition. Lastly, flying under commercial architecture uh, with Axiom, with also collaborating with SpaceX. During our training, I heard both you and Peggy mentioning multiple times, as opposed to a long-term, 6-month-long mission, that is a marathon, but what we're about to embark is a sprint. Right? We have only 2 weeks, and we need to execute so much, like 54 research investigations, 28 different engagements in outreach. So for AX-3, what was different for you in a commander's role to establish this trust, build this shared vision amongst the crew members, so that you can achieve those various goals of nations and institutions?
Thank you, Tuba, for the question, and it's great to be here at Saha and to be in this beautiful country and this truly impressive expo. My first time here, so I'm very pleased to be representing Axiom here with you today. So I guess, Tuba, the answer to your question, I mean, first of all, you mentioned it in your introduction. We spent that week together in the Pacific Northwest. You called it survival. You know, I'll remind you that we brought all our food with us, so we knew we were going to survive. But in general, it's part of a program called the National Outdoor Leadership School, and we really took this idea from NASA, who does this with a lot of their crews. Also, that enterprise uses that modality to train executive teams, to train Naval Academy midshipmen, to train even Navy SEALs. And so it's really an exercise in cohesion, in leadership, and in followership, which is as important. So the idea is not whether you're going to survive or not, but you're generally in an environment that is quite harsh. So you're physiologically uncomfortable. You're either cold or you're hot or you're wet. It turns out in our case we had a pretty nice time. The weather was unexpectedly beautiful. The only time that it rained in the entire 10-day, or actually 7-day expedition, we found ourselves in a campground that had a roof, so we didn't get wet. It was actually quite lovely. But nonetheless, the idea here is that you're put in a situation where your defenses are lowered, and your ability to understand each other's behaviors, both good and bad, is more keen because you're more aware of those things. And that's really an important part of bonding together as a crew. So I have a better example from AX-1, which is the first mission. We did a similar exercise, but it was in Alaska, and it was absolutely miserable. And we, unlike AX-3, where we had already known each other, in fact, it happened relatively late in our 9-month training flow. For AX-1, it was the very first time, and I think this is very important for us to set the stage and really get to know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and is a very good first step in embarking on this training program, which Tuva went into some detail. But we spent a lot of time together, you know, and he introduced us or welcomed us as his space brothers. And it is not an understatement to say that we really become family when we fly together. And this all starts with the very first steps that you take in training. The training is what really sets the stage for everything that happens in orbit. People ask a lot, well, aren't you afraid when you sit on top of the rocket with tons of combustible fuel behind you? The answer is no, because you're ready, because you've done that many, many times in a simulator, and that sort of repetition and familiarity, both with the systems and with each other, is what builds a trust, too, that I think you're referring to.
Well, thank you very much, LA. And before I move on, maybe I call him LA, right? You might think that what does this have to do with Los Angeles? But his name is Michael Lopez Alegria, but he's referred as MLA or LA too often. So that's why how I'm gonna be calling him from time to time for audience's reference. But Walter, I would like to turn to you and ask you about your previous training, your background as well, right? You brought together an Italian Air Force experience. You trained at Star City as a cosmonaut, right? You saw a completely different way of doing things, a completely different vehicle to go up in space, and then you trained at all these facilities as part of AX-3 mission. Prior to that AX-2, you were the backup, one of the backups for the AX-2 mission. So those different types of experiences, which parts of your earlier training, when you think about it, transferred most naturally or effortlessly into AX-3, right? And which parts you had to adapt to a modern, like SpaceX Dragon, Crew Dragon, very sleek screen kind of interface, which parts you had to adapt, both in terms of technologies that have been utilized and also the crew dynamics, also maybe the training as well.
Thank you, Tuba, for the question, and I want to thank you, the organizers, for having us over here to give us the opportunity to meet again all together. So it's a beautiful city, and very nice to be back in Istanbul after a while, after our post-flight tour. So yes, I'm pretty sure the first European been trained as a cosmonaut since the time of the former Soviet Union, when some Germany people went to Star City. And the reason why in 2011 the Italian Air Force sent me to Star City was because the NASA and the US retired the space shuttle. So for nobody was possible to fly unless trained on the Soyuz. And that was the reason why I went over there. And the impact was quite remarkable, because the approach of the Russians was completely different, and I can guess with the same experience compared with US approach. And on top of that, I was completely integrated in a Russian class in the basic cosmonaut basic training. So without the support like normally the space agencies do for the astronauts, so they have some framework to support them. It was just launched and forgot by the Air Force and fully integrated for 16 months in the Russian class, but it was an amazing experience. So first of all, the training was very intense, I guess as any basic training, where you are supposed to learn many things for set the basic knowledge to be available to flight. I would say that over the time, so I went through the cosmonaut basic training, then I went back to Russia for the advanced training for getting the skills on the Soyuz, and then the Russian segment for the station and the EVA activities. Gave me the opportunity to learn a lot about the stations, though the architecture, if you compared, of course, Soyuz and Dragon are two completely different spacecraft. Even if you consider the Russian segment of the ISS and the US one, they are based on different architectures. But nevertheless, the training gave me all the elements to feel quite confident about the framework, the context. It was much easier to move back in 2019 for starting through Axiom. That was another interesting, remarkable news. So it wasn't my professional training as astronaut through the agencies, but it was through the first commercial enterprise allowed based on a Space Act agreement to train professional astronauts. So that was really was a nice experience. The other important part of the training with the Russians was, of course, we had some survival trainings, like the sea survival trainings, winter survival trainings that in Star City in Russia during the winter time is pretty easy. So that exposed, myself.
Did you have food during your survival training?
Just exactly the food that you may have eventually coming back in an off-nominal situation. So you are just in a capsule, you are just landed, you have to, they start the watch, and then you have to follow the procedure to survive with your training. And that was very nice. So it was one of the training actually giving you the feeling that you can't, regardless how much you can be physical training, professional trained, you can't really survive in those situations just with the help of your crew. That change your mindset about yourself and how you have to behave when you are in the training. So all these kind of situations were really instrumentally useful to then move to the US. So the training, again, was pretty similar. Technically wise, Dragon is very different. It's like to fly a fifth generation fighter aircraft compared with the third one, maybe, even not the fourth. So the Soyuz is a 3 cubic meter for 3 persons. You have to sit. It's very cramped and tiny volume. Dragon is like a luxury vehicle. It's a Tesla. So even in the Soyuz, you were so much with the astronauts and the men in the loop, following all the procedure. For the most, the Dragon is more automatic, so you can really handle much easier. But having said that, the aspects that really I wasn't prepared for in this changing to the commercial space flight was the mindset. So when I landed in Axiom, the approach used by Axiom to deal with the astronauts was completely different. Russians really didn't care about your comfort or your lifestyle. They were very tough in what they were doing. Instead, Axiom was really taking care also about the comfort of the astronauts. So the approach was completely different. It was more human-oriented, more oriented to give astronauts also the possibility to enjoy the experience, even during the training. So the level of the careness provided by the Axiom staff and people was much better than the ones received by the Russians, and I'm saying that in a positive way. So the training with the Russians was really a nice experience. Then, of course, the training was much easier on the Dragon. We were exposed even during my previous training as professional astronauts on the station procedure, but we didn't really were involved too much in the station procedure.
Yeah.
And then the much easier part, the easiest part actually, was to be in training for just 9 months with this gentleman. So the background of my colleagues, and of course I can't speak about the background of my commander, it was amazing, made everything much easier. So we really, I still remember when we presented ourselves to the NASA astronaut office, they really considered, based on the background of these colleagues, like a real NASA professional astronaut. So that made all the training flow much easier. Said that, and concluding, the training in Russia was a really fundamental part of the training to get to Axiom and NASA much smoother.
Yes, perfect. Thank you very much. I would now like to move to Alper. So you came to AX-3 with years of Turkish Air Force pilot, fighter jet pilot, and also commercial airline captain experience. And during those experiences, during those times, you worked with many international teams as part of the job, right? So which habits from those fighter aviation, such as checklist discipline and crew resource management and emergency thinking, helped you most while you were on board ISS? How do they translate for you for this historic missions, and which habits you had to change under those microgravity conditions?
Thank you so much, Tua, for your thoughtful questions and great preparation. Your moderation here is going to be a great model for several other sessions. So I appreciate your support, and I really enjoyed Tua's support during our training as well, ahead of the mission. I really benefited a lot from his engineering skills as well. Hepiniz hoş geldiniz demek istiyorum öncelikle.
I'd like to
For guests coming here and joining our session. I also would like to express my great appreciation and really gratefulness to Saha Istanbul for giving us this great chance to be able to come together again here in Istanbul after quite a long time. So calling it just a crewmate would be so simple. This is a brothership of fate, because going up to the space, these people that you are executing the mission together with might be the last people that you will see ahead of your family. So that means a lot to us, and I'm really so great grateful for their existence all the way from the beginning of the mission. Coming back to your question, Tua, I think one of the strong assets that I could bring from the aviation, military aviation in Turkish airports, as well as the civil aviation in Turkish Airlines, uh, was bringing all those training background and the habitual patterns that I have been using in the flight operations in both fields, both in military as well as civil aviation. You know, checklist discipline and the CRM skills are one of the most dominant areas that is being executed for the safe execution of the mission. Up in the space, there is no room for the assumptions. There is no room for, you know, random behaviors. There needs to be always verifying, cross-check, communicate, and execute. So those four steps are vital. You have no chance to be able to just assume and go ahead based on your assumptions. I don't want to mention a really special quote here coming from a famous movie that the assumption is something, but really there is no space for any kind of assumption over there. So all the items which has been practiced for several months long training periods are over there in the checklist. All you need to do is keeping up your discipline and stick hardly all these checklist items. As I said, verify that you are following the right track, and then cross-check with either by yourself or with a crew member of yours, and then communicate it to the control center, and then execute, finally getting an approval from there. Another thing that's really affecting it is the CRM skills. That's why, as you really clearly summarized and gave a really nice information to all the audience about different phases of training, which is including nose training as well, is a really strong phase of the training where they try to get to see this coherence and the really nice harmony looking like working perfectly in the conditioned space. However, they want to see it under the stress factors resulting from the uncontrollable effects of the nature. So, which is pretty similar to the space operation area, because everything is planned, everything is relying on some certain planning factors. However, nothing is guaranteed when you go up there. Abnormal operation is an imminent fact that is waiting out there for you to be able to adapt immediately. So based on that, the CRM skills and the harmony in between the crew members is another vital fact that we are using directly adapted from the aviation skills that we have been gaining over here in the on Earth. However, there is one fact that we need to adapt or change some of the mindset and the skills that we are used to here in atmosphere conditions on Earth in aviation, which is the existence of gravity. As a pilot here on Earth, especially with those platforms that Marcus also have been flying still, is that you do all your maneuvers based on the existence of the gravity. The G-forces that you are controlling, or like art kind of maneuver skills that you are executing, are solely based on the existence of the gravity. If you rely on these skills, you immediately fail up in the sky, up in the space. So you need to be aware that now there is no way to control the force, but presume what is going to come up based on the lack of the gravity over there. So you need to change that mindset. I have been saying that the space is like a threshold where the long-going cognitive skills in our mind is fighting with the body reflexes that is being adapted to the space arena over there. So that was the main thing that was needed to be changed over there. Thank you, sir.
I remember you mentioning, so you need to be really careful while you're in that fighter jet during your operation, and you need to be on top of everything. up in space, I remember you mentioning that everybody is a Superman, right?
Yes.
Everybody's just flying like a Superman. You're yeah, super character with superpowers. So that is an interesting psychological shift as well, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just based on that, I have been, traveling all over the country together with you, and it's been already 700 events, public events so far, and TUI is also contributing a lot to that. Everywhere I go, you might also have the children, and everybody's asking how it is feeling like up in space. And I'm asking them, have you ever been to a playground where you would use the little tokens to get on different instruments in a playground? I'm telling them, whatever a playground means for a child, the space means for an astronaut.
Yeah.
So you're so busy, getting so tired, working on really serious issues, but on the other hand, you are in an amazing playground that you are being given an unlimited token that you get on the instruments as much as you want.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Marcus, so in 2022, you were selected as one of the reserve astronauts for ESA. It was a new thing, right? They came up with this reserve astronaut concept for the first time, and you were amongst the ones who were selected. And within the next year, right, you became one of the first Europeans of this new generation to actually fly under that structure, if you will. And you became this project astronaut for ESA. And after you, Suavoj also flew as part of Axiom's fourth mission to the International Space Station under the commandership of Peggy. So what did AX-3 teach ESA about how Europe can access the orbit faster while still preserving the rigor and the necessities of a strong astronaut training and mission safety, for that matter, right? Have you seen any kind of shift in perspective in which ESA implements human spaceflight missions for the next decade to come?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Tuva, and thanks everyone for having us here. It's great to be back with the brothers, as we said earlier, and also to be back in Turkey is also fantastic. I feel really welcome here, which is great. Also, I have to mention, you're bringing back a lot of memories right now, Alper, when you're talking about how it is to fly without the wings and how it is to manage not getting the help from gravity, being able to sit here. But it's fantastic. I really recommend it. It's fantastic. And so back to your question, though. You're right. I was selected to the ESA astronaut class, and it had several parts, and one part was the reserves, which was kind of depend a little bit on how you look at it, but a little bit of a capacity reserve. There was a hope for more space activities than was certain. And I don't think anyone believed this would happen so fast as it did, but thanks to Axiom existing and doing this and opening up access to space in a different way that's been possible before, this opportunity came up, and Sweden together with ESA and Axiom made that happen really fast. And I think that was very important. First of all, I want to give credit to all the involved organizations, because doing things in a new way in a very serious business such as human spaceflight is not, it shouldn't be taken for granted that you make those decisions. But the decisions were made, and then something that I also really appreciated from all the organizations involved was the ambition that was set out from the beginning was not, it was a little bit higher than the lowest bar, but it was not fixed. So when we started the training and found new ways, the ambition increased all the time. And that also takes a mindset of continuously reevaluating what you're aiming for, and don't be afraid of raising that bar. So during these months, we achieved a lot more than we were set out to do from the beginning, and that would not have happened if we wouldn't have, and this is both on the ESA side and actually all the organizations involved, such as NASA and Axiom and SpaceX and everyone, if we wouldn't have allowed ourselves to challenge the way we did it yesterday and do it in another way tomorrow. And when you do that, I think it's really important to remember the purpose rather than the process. So not just, yeah, this is a process, this is how we're doing it, but remember the purpose all the time. And that comes back to a lot of our training as well. When we go out on an expeditionary training, as you talked about earlier with Knowles, and remember the purpose and challenge yourself in that. And when things get sour or not as comfortable as you used to, remember why you're doing it and then learn from that. And I think that's something that's been very, very helpful in this crew. I think it took, I don't know, it probably didn't even take us 48 hours to figure out that, okay, we can skip a lot of steps because everyone is so operationally, the mindset was so operational. So everything that's been spoken about earlier here when it comes to nominal operations, like when thing goes as you plan, and off nominal, so if you have emergencies, for instance, and then be able to shift gear and know that, okay, this is not, this, now we need to back out, assess, decide what to do, and then make the best choice from here. All those mindsets were really in place. And I think organization-wise, coming back and being open-minded and realize that it's not only an established organization that you're a part of that knows how to do that, but there are other organizations that knows the same things. It might be done a little bit different. Purpose is same though, so it's very compatible, and be open to that and merge that. That's a good way to, with comfort, have progress moving fast. And that's something I really learned. Being open-minded and try to find ways rather than see the problems.
That's a wonderful segue to maybe a question that I'm asking Michael, to you about managing this multinational group, multinational effort, if you will, right? The AX-3 was not merely a mission to the ISS. It was a concerted, coordinated effort between, it was mentioned before, Axiom Space, NASA, SpaceX, Italian Air Force, Turkish Space Agency, many international partners, and also within those organizations, many universities, research institutes, private companies conducting experiments on board the ISS. So during our training, I remember clearly Axiom Space actually worked really diligently to manage that complex relationship between multiple international organizations. And I'm interested more on while you were on board ISS. It was also the largest, I think, nations represented on board ISS in its history, right, in terms of different nationalities represented by various astronauts. And from your perspective, from the commander's seat, what do you think was the most important operational habit that allowed this multinational mission to run smoothly and as planned?
Answered the question for me with the phrase operational habit, and I think it all started here with this crew. Walter, you mentioned how when we introduced ourselves to NASA as a crew, I think NASA was a little surprised at the breadth of experience that we have. You know, NASA has been hiring non-pilots since 1978, so scientists, engineers, medical doctors, etc. Obviously, before that, it was only military test pilots, and they started seeing, well, on the space shuttle, we're going to be doing experiments, and we have to broaden the scope of the astronaut corps appropriately. And so often, an astronaut class will have a lot of different backgrounds, and a particular crew may have, you know, maybe there's a pilot or two, maybe there's an engineer, maybe there's a scientist. But let's face it, operating a spacecraft is a very operational task, hence the word. And military aviators, all four of us are military aviators, gave us a huge advantage in that regard. So this way of thinking, I think, is a first step, is an approach Alper mentioned, or Tuva's question, you know, checklist discipline, crew resource management. All those things are sort of inherent into our DNA on the very first day we showed up for training, which is a big advantage. Secondly, once we were on board, I would say that there is an ethos that all crew members share, and that is sort of to accomplish the mission of spaceflight. So you may speak a different language. By the way, there were 9 different languages that were spoken on ISS during the time we were there, out of 11 crew members, which is pretty impressive. You may speak a different language, you may have a different culture, you may have different religious, social, whatever preferences, but at the end of the day, we're all there to do a mission, and I think that is the driving factor that makes it easy to transgress these various borders. To give a very clear example, again, referring back to AX-1, we launched in April 2022. That name may seem familiar because that was not long after Russia invaded Ukraine. And there were 3 Russian cosmonauts on board when we launched, and before we went, there was a lot of consternation about how is this going to go? How are we going to interact with them, even though they had already been interacting with other Americans, Europeans, and Japanese on the space station at that time. But what I wouldn't say surprised me, but what I found is that when we got there, we just didn't talk about the things that made us different. We focused on the things that made us similar. And there was a lot of things that make us similar, again, mostly to do with we're there to do a mission. We have a certain way of thinking. We have a certain cultural identity that binds us all, regardless of where we're from or what language we speak. And so the problem ends up honestly taking care of itself.
Okay, now we're back. Thank you very much, Emily. And Walter, I want to turn to you about your spaceflight experience before AX-3. A couple of months before, you flew on a suborbital mission, Virtu Uno. Did I get that correctly? Okay. Galactic number 1. It was the first ever commercial spaceflight mission of Virgin Galactic on board Unity vehicle, and we kind of share this bond as well. I was fortunate enough to fly on its last mission. So you opened it, I somewhat closed it, and you, during that Galactic 1 mission, you conducted multiple research investigations as well, both human-tended and autonomous. I'm curious, how did that particular suborbital flight help you in terms of its human-tended research experience? How did it influence and help you the way you approach to a longer duration science mission on board ISS? I mean, was this a useful experience for you, both feeling on your body to be actually on top of a rocket, which is something to be held, right? And also being in that operational environment to carry out some research. How was it for you?
Thank you, Tova, and of course, it was the last one until the new Delta class will be operational in a few months, hopefully, so
Yeah,
cross
hopefully,
fingers.
hopefully, yeah.
So it's, the question is interesting because I think it's not only related to what is the added value for astronauts. So within the astronauts community, the importance for the added value that these suborbital flights could bring to the single astronauts has been questioned and discussed many times. So, but I guess it's worthier to expand the angle. So first of all, we go to space to make research, right? To push innovation, to expand our knowledge. The space station is in the end an orbital scientific platform. It's a laboratory.
Yes.
And either way, now, if you want to test something in microgravity, either you fly the zero-G flight for 20, 30 seconds, or you go to the ISS. The first one is very cheap, too short maybe to run some experiments, while the second one, you can get all the microgravity that you want, but it's much more expensive and it takes a longer time. So these platforms, in the end, are an intermediate gap filler, really useful to expand the way in which the research communities, universities may have access to the microgravity. The idea that we as Air Force, and we joined the mission with the National Research Council, so was it a joint effort between the Air Force, who purchased, run, and integrated all the mission along with the research centers, was trying to use this level of experimentation, just an intermediate step before getting to the ISS. So in the end, you may have payloads running a few seconds on the zero-G flights, and then you can extend and expand and make these payloads more complicated to the suborbital flights, and then scale up to the ISS. So it's kind of a progressive way in which you can use all the microgravity platforms potentially available to optimize and to create some synergies, and to even expand the amount of people really flying to space in brackets. It depends if you are able to hit and cross the Kármán line or not. Yeah. We did not. We were at 92, 93 kilometers of altitude, but it wasn't really the point, yeah. Or eventually not. So the point from the astronaut standpoint, my experience was that is pretty useful. Physically wise, so you are not exposed to a so long period of microgravity, capable to give you the real feedback in terms of how your body reacted. I didn't feel anything during the suborbital flight. I just enjoyed it. It was too short. I had some nausea at the very beginning of the insertion, so my body took a little bit longer to get adapted, and in the suborbital flight I didn't really experience anything. While you had this propulsion phase, which is quite rough also with the suborbital as you experienced, which is quite interesting. But the most important part is you expose the astronauts in what is in the end their real role. They are a part of the research chain. They are a part. They are people. They are people involved in research. In my case, in our case, we were three of us. So I was the commander of the mission. There was an Air Force doctor, and there was a research engineer from the National Research Council. So we were involved in how to design the experiments. Most of them were automatically supposed to work. But then in the end, due to the very short time, 3 minutes, you really didn't have time to recover any failure. So we had to pair and work with the PIs, with the principal investigators, to really define, okay, what's going on if something is going not as expected, if some of the experiments are not working in an automatic way, just to optimize all the process and all the procedure over the 3 minutes that we had. So it was very meaningful from the training standpoints in terms of mindset, because we were supposed to engage and interact with the pilots, with the crew, among ourselves, and with the principal investigators to optimize the experimental program. Of course, there's this physical training, which is very useful, because then in the end you are supposed over the 2 weeks to make some aerobatics flights. So in the end, I guess there's some value. There's also some risk associated, so some of the concerns were, okay, but these are very experimental flights. If I had to say which one in between the suborbital flights or the Dragon flights was a little bit riskier, I would say the suborbital flights. So that means a kind of consideration and assessment. It is really worth it to eventually expose our astronauts to some kind of a risk. In the end, I guess it depends on the level of the maturity of these vehicles. So yes, the more they will be operational and flying, and the more the agencies or the different institutions can feel confident to use them. And then you can expand the community of the flyers. Not only professional astronauts are supposed to fly to the ISS, but also have normal, I would say, researchers just flying to perform and carry out experiments. So again, still the bottleneck at the moment is that we don't have so many platforms working in this sector. We are waiting for Virgin Galactic get back to be operational. But I think there's some room in this commercial space flight where one could be an enabler for the other. So the point is that this suborbital market could really trigger a much wider amount of entities and research centers to invest money once they crossed the initial level of maturity of their experiments to invest in orbital spaceflight. So I see some potential synergies. Even NASA just decided to use these suborbital flights for testing some payloads without astronauts at the moment. Yes. But I think it's going to be very useful, and we as Italy, we are planning to use again these platforms eventually for making some other flights, but we'll see what's
exactly
next.
my follow-up was, I was planning to ask your future plans when Delta becomes available. Right now, Blue Origin also stopped their New Shepard flights because they want to focus more on the lunar ambitions. So when they become available, would you be interested in carrying out more research and more researchers?
Well, from the Air Force standpoint, I guess the wing body, it's more attractive than the capsule.
Yes.
So I guess, and again, if we want to fly a capsule from this standpoint, so we have the Dragon, and then maybe in the future the Boeing spacecraft. Yeah. This platform that Virgin Galactic is almost now starting to get back in the flight test campaign. Yeah. It's really valuable. The point is also to make a compromise in terms of sustainability. As Air Force, as any public organization, we have to take care about the taxpayers' money, right? So we can get some experiments and get some payloads, even from the dual or military interest, much easier and faster in these platforms, and then select and pick the ones eventually more interesting to fly to orbital flights. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Now, Alper abi, said this a lot, right? When I actually say this, I will be essentially quoting you, that the Turkish astronaut and science mission was not merely a journey for an individual, right? It was Turkey's first ever human space flight mission, and as part of it, you carried essentially a national expectation beyond its scientific and technological aspirations. So what I'm curious about has to do with how did you personally balance this responsibility, right, with very precise, disciplined work required to be able to conduct those scientific investigations on board the ISS. On one hand, you have an emotional responsibility, but on the other hand, you have a very precise task that you need to be implementing on behalf of all these really important researchers that organized and prepared those research investigations.
Tua, thanks so much again. You have really touched based on a very critical part of the mission preparation phase, because all the way from the beginning, I was so pleased to meet with these legacy astronauts that we used to read the names and then get the chance to be able to meet, like our mission commander, Michael Lopez Alegria, the legends in our minds. All of them had really impressive stories. And as you coveted, for me, it was a breaking moment, breaking point in my dreams. Because up until that moment, when I first, not even selected, but when I first heard about the announcement coming from our president on the 22nd of May 2022, up until that moment, the limits of my dreams was the sky that I could see with my bare eyes and the airplanes flying in it. That was the end. As a Turkish child, I would always encourage myself when I see that spacefaring nations' stories and the dreams that they could gift to their children, I would always say, that doesn't belong to us. That is a gift that is privileged to the other countries' children. So that moment when our president announced that the Republic of Turkey has decided to send the very first Turkish nationality up in the space, like that was unveiling the whole curtain that has been blocking our dreams. So it was absolutely a heavy emotional moment for me. However, when it comes to the execution of the mission, there is no space for heavy emotions up there. You have to be focusing on all the procedures that you have been training on, all the operational phases that you need to fly, and anything related to the execution of all these preparation phases. All the people watching that moment over here in our country or in different parts of the world have the right to be so happy, so emotional, feel all the goosebumps in their body, but only a single person cannot do it, which is the person who is executing the operation out there. There is no emotional weightness over there. You need to just focus on the operation, because nominal operation might imminently turn out to be an abnormal operation, that all of the crew members are supposed to execute the steps that have been memorized up until that moment. So you are switching a completely different phase. That is again aligned with the aviation as well. Same thing in aviation. For some people, aviation is all about watching the beautiful sky and the clouds out there when you are flying. There is way too much inside, rather than just being able to watch this beauty outside. You need to focus again to the operation. And I'm calling this as like compartmentalization, completely separating what you're supposed to do there from your emotions. So the mission itself is way beyond of realization of a single individual's dreams. It is carrying out and carrying the dreams of a nation and our youth generations up into a next level. So it was really important, and we have been already observing that among all these meetings that we have been executing within the last 25 months since the end of the mission throughout our country. It reflected a lot on our children, again, both emotionally and in terms of constructing and standing up their self-confidence and letting them know that a new path is now open under the strong will and decision of our government. And we will keep going. But all they need is that we are not that nation anymore who was lacking all these privileges that was gifted to the other nations' children. So I'm so glad our country has taken this bold step, and this is a journey that will continue in the coming future.
That's genuinely my hope as well. You open the door for the next generation of space explorers for this country to take the take the steps that you also mentioned, the initial steps, right? First steps,
Yep.
the very important first step that hopefully they will start running in the future based on and thanks to your contributions for this historic mission.
Thanks to your contribution as well.
So, Marcus, uh, you have a background in Swedish Air Force as a pilot, right? You acted as Saab's chief pilot, chief test pilot, and head of flight operations as well. This gave you a strong engineering and operational perspective. I remember our conversations in Houston. I really enjoyed diving deep in technical issues with you, so you have a really strong engineering background. I'm curious, once on the ISS, what surprised you the most about the human factors in space, right? In terms of the communication, teamwork, fatigue management, we touched upon CRM a little bit, but and adapting to different procedures, nominal operations, off-nominal operations. So how was this surprising to you in any way? Maybe it was not, right? Maybe it was all within the expected limits, but what surprised you in those types of operations and how different agencies also made decisions and interface with themselves while you were conducting a very serious operation on board ISS?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, it's no, there were plenty of things that surprised me, and some parts did not surprise me. And maybe I'll start with the parts that did not surprise me. So during the training, we have a lot of very good simulators and mock-ups, and we take things apart and put them together and follow the procedures. And so that was close enough to make the work, let's say, call it that, not surprising, and in a very good way, because then you can be efficient in knowing what you're supposed to do. What's more surprising, though, even if you have talked about it and you're intellectually aware that things will be different when you're in microgravity and you're flying around, was so adaptation to this for me was really getting used to how long time it will take me to go over there and get a tool out from something that when you open it up, everything is floating around, and you have to make sure that nothing escapes, and you have to get that precise tool and then close it. And that is so different. So even if you've seen it on videos and you talked about it during training, and when that happens, just to keep everything in line and the time it takes, I'm pretty used to knowing. Okay, I'm gonna get a wrench, I'm gonna get this nut out, I'm gonna move this and put that back. I have like a feeling for how long that will take.
Yes.
That's totally different in space.
So not necessarily physical adaptation, but
No.
like perspectival,
Yeah.
like intuition disrupting.
So that's something that surprised me, though. The physical adaptation, how fast our brain that has not, so not a lot of human beings have been in this environment. Still, our brain in quite a short time understands how much force is needed to fly over there. How much, what do I need to turn around? I can't just turn. I have no friction, or I have no gravity providing friction that I can use. So I have to use something else. And all those non-intuitive things becomes intuitive surprisingly fast. I expected the brain to be a bit slower on that. On the other hand, I expected the brain to be better at seeing things that's floating in microgravity, because sometimes while eating or whatever and something escapes and you can see that in front of your crew member and you're like, oh, there's this thing floating there. Can you just grab that? And like, no, where is it? And you can't see it even though it's so close. So most of the times you have to float over and grab it yourself because there's no point trying to point it out. Of course, big things. So one day I remember we were eating and there is this tele lens objective to a camera like this big, right? It just comes floating slowly past. That one you see. But the small parts, you don't, which is also surprising because we can see insects, right? So I haven't really figured this one out. But that's also surprised me.
Yeah.
And all those small things. So as you hear now, I'm not talking about the difficulty of connecting one system to another or performing a task or doing research or making blood draws on yourself, which you do and all that. It's the standard, just human being living things. That was, even though you read about it, talked about it, still surprising
Yeah.
how much you rely on intuition here, which doesn't really work up there. And it was fun
That's
to,
very
to
interesting.
see
Yeah,
and
yeah.
live. Yeah.
That's wonderful. That's very interesting. So, for the awareness of our audience, I will have just one last round of questions for each crew member. Then we will open up, hoping that we will still have some time for Q&A from the audience. So, you might want to start some questions that you might ask the crew members if you get the chance. So, LA, Axiom Space is busy, right? You guys are working on many different projects. Axiom Station is the biggest one, the most the most interesting one that I'm also personally looking forward to, right? As a maybe it's an interesting place to maybe fly into in the future. So we also got some training in your facilities, SSDF. We saw the interesting interior design. So you are taking a totally different design approach when designing this new station from ISS. So changing pretty much a lot of things as part of this effort, station building effort. You will carry the fifth astronaut mission, private astronaut mission to the ISS, hopefully in 2027. Another major project that you guys are working on has to do with extravehicular mobility units. So you are building the next generation of spacesuits for Artemis missions on the lunar surface. So a lot is going on for you guys. What I'm curious about has to do with which lessons from this particular mission, AX-3 crew training, payload integration, onboard ISS operations, partner coordination for that matter, right? Just coordinating all that effort amongst different agencies. How is that shaping how Axiom prepares for its own commercial space station operations and also maybe lunar operations in the future?
Thanks, Tuva. To summarize a few things, so he mentioned Axiom Station. The International Space Station has been in orbit and operational for 25 years. Amazing place. We spent 2 of the best weeks of our lives there, but unfortunately, as a machine, it's going to wear out, and the agencies that have sponsored it are not making another government platform. So the logical explanation is to have a commercial platform that will succeed it using some of those same users, but also opening it up to other countries who have, as of now, not had a chance to go to the ISS. The space suit is a very interesting project that we're working on next year, either on the ISS or on Artemis 3, which is the next in the series of missions that will ultimately go to the moon. We plan to test that spacesuit on orbit so that it will be eventually ready to go to the moon in 2028. This is obviously a very big undertaking, and it involves, I would say, roughly half of our company is focused on that development. And then finally, these astronaut missions, starting from AX-1 all the way through what will be AX-5, also in 2027, is something that we have been focusing in. And Tuva, you mentioned sort of this inclusion of more nationalities and partnerships. And I think a couple of things come to mind. First of all, we are very keen to include our partners, Sweden, Turkey, Italy, and others, in the space ecosystem, the commercial space ecosystem. With Italy, it's quite straightforward. We are building the modules of the space station that I described in one of the facilities in Italy, mainly because they built many of the modules on ISS today. So then try to reinvent the technology. We went with a company that has the tooling, that has the processes in place, and Once the shell is complete, the idea is to outfit it in the U.S., launch it in Florida, and the first module will mate to the International Space Station. It'll spend some time there while the second module is launched into a similar orbit. Then the first one will detach after having retrieved some equipment that that the agencies would like to keep, bring it to the second module, and we'll have an operational space station at that time. We hope that will occur as soon as 2028. So with Italy, it's pretty clear. We're also investigating some other collaborations with them. With Turkey as well, we're meeting with the Turkish Space Agency. Yusuf, thank you for coming to join us. We hope to advance in several different areas, but I think the message here is that we want not to have a customer come and fly with us and then be done with it. We want those programs to be sustainable in those countries, and in order to do that, you have to engage the country as a whole. And it's engaging with their industry, it's engaging with their government, and more, it's engaging with their universities and their research institutions. So tomorrow we will sign an agreement with the Middle East Technical University to join a collaboration called the University Alliance, where right now we have over 20 universities from all over the world who will be advocates for continuing microgravity research in space. And this is a very important element of this three-legged stool between government, industry, and academia to help promote the drive, so the source of the investigations, the research that will be done. The industry can provide the technology to make the experiments, and the government can sponsor those experiments or sponsor astronauts to conduct those experiments in space. So the idea, the fundamental thread here is to include the countries in this growing ecosystem. Space is no longer the domain of 2 or 3 countries. It is now the domain of all countries. And the more that we can invite players that have not previously been as present in low Earth orbit and ultimately the moon, the better for everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you. Hopefully our nation is also going to be contributing more meaningfully beyond flying individuals, right? Even though I would love to fly, I would also be very much interested in flying some tangible, cutting-edge experiments so that we're going to expand this capability amongst our research institutions, universities, and companies as well. So, Bolter, last question for you, if I may. You guys are also busy back in Italy, right? You have been making some significant investments in multiple different areas when it comes to space exploration. When I say you, of course, I'm referring to the Italian space industry in general, signed lunar mission agreements with commercial lunar payload services providers, for example. Recently, Martian cargo agreements with some of the cargo-faring companies to Martian soil over the next decade. And also, as LA mentioned, commercial space station infrastructure is being built currently in Italy. As part of this, Italian Air Force has also been positioning itself, I think, strongly, really solidly around this aerospace activities, and your particular role in Houston is a direct example of that, and in supporting those efforts. So, taking your post-AX-3 astronaut experience, when you think about all the things that you have accomplished as part of this mission, what capabilities should an Air Force in the world, or a space agency for that matter, need to develop next when it comes to astronaut operations, space domain awareness, maybe, suborbital test beds we talked about? You were maybe thinking about launching with another platform when it becomes available, or human-tended microgravity research investigations to turn a singular human spaceflight experience into a sustainable exploration program with strong institutional capability and capacity.
Thank you for the question, which is not easy to answer.
I bet.
I'll try to do my best in a short time. So first of all, we've been talking about space, and of course, space has been always an opportunity for cooperations. The space station, I used to say, it's the biggest, the most valuable diplomatic tool that we had. We think about that we put what was left from the former Soviet Union along with the United States, and we have been partnering for almost 30 years. So space has been, still is, and will be an opportunity for cooperation, but without any doubt, space is also an operational domain. As your Turkish Minister of Defense said, the space is playing a more and more an important critical role for armed forces, for our operations. In the military side, is considered a potential warfighter domain, so there are many applications where space is enabling for the armed forces, the air forces as well. So there are two sides of the coins. Now the challenge from at least the Italian standpoint, so we are trying to bridge these two different approach. So there's the use of the microgravity and the orbital infrastructures for experiments, for scientific research, for technology innovation, and on the other side there's an Italian Air Force, as long as, for instance, recently at the Space Symposium, also the Space Force was mentioning about manned operation. Think about once we will have an infrastructure on the moon. If we will need of a rescue mission for any reasons, maybe there's the need also for having skilled people from the military to be ready to step in. So now the point, without pushing too much in that direction, how we can use and exploit this commercial infrastructure also in the interest of the armed forces. And you mentioned my role in Houston. I'm running an office, it's just myself, but conceptually, the Air Force opened an office for the commercial space flight and the access to space. So when it comes to trying to use these infrastructures, we have to balance, because in the end, I strongly believe we need to preserve space for cooperation and for the peaceful useful. So we don't need to militarize these infrastructures. We really need to pay a lot of attention to what we do in this context. We are talking about the legal framework. So what is the legal framework based upon we will use these infrastructures? At this moment, we think that these new commercial space stations can be even renamed as multi-role orbital infrastructures. So they could provide something in the armed forces and the Air Force interest. First of all, we need to push research and development, even without bringing pure military technologies, but there are a lot of dual technologies, and there's an ecosystem, as you mentioned, that might be find some interest in partnering with the armed forces and to bring technologies and experiments to these commercial infrastructures. There's another important part, what we normally do in testing the aircraft. We do testing, validation, and demonstration. We can do this in-orbit testing, validation, and demonstration using this commercial space flight. And then we can also bring some interesting applications and services that might expand also the operational capability of the armed forces. Think about, for instance, space weather. It's something impacting on the space infrastructures. And I remember, we were carrying some experiments trying to catch some of the thunderstorms with UAVs sources. This is something important also for shaping the space weather modeling. So there are multiple things that can be really achieved and carried out in these future commercial space stations, which will allow to have a framework a little bit larger in the sense without so many restrictions as on the ISS as a pure governmental scientific initiative that might be really in the interests and really worth for countries, and that's the reason why Italy is partnering with Axiom and try to see how we can really maximize the benefits from these new initiatives.
I think you are a great example of how a single human spaceflight mission can be turned into a sustainable and a long-term infrastructure and capability building effort for an entire nation. So what you guys are doing is immensely sort of inspirational in that sense. And Alper, I would like to ask you something similar that I asked Walter. In addition to the Turkish astronaut and science mission, as part of our national space program, we have many other goals that we want to achieve, right? We have the lunar exploration missions, for example. We're going to be building a new spaceport to launch larger capacity rockets. We are going to be building a space technologies development zone. So we have multiple goals that we are hoping to achieve and working hard to achieve over the next couple of years. So how should Turkey use the AX-3 experience in particular to build its human capital, experiment pipeline, and also industry partnerships for that next phase, right? How should we proceed? And on that note, what are some of the concrete steps that we can take as the Turkish space industry, both commercial and government for that matter, that should take to establish a value-generating space ecosystem within the country?
Tua, thanks so much. That's a great question again. Turkish astronaut and scientific mission is more than just a mission, first manned space mission itself. It carries a lot of meanings together with it, giving a trigger to carry our great potential that has already been grown up in the aviation and defense area within the last 20 years and get that adaptation into the space arena right now. So, as you might have already mentioned, Turkish astronaut and scientific mission was only one out of 10 goals in our national space program. It was executed in 2024 just to crown our centennial of our republic, and now we continue with the remaining targets that is already stated in our national space program. Thankfully, within the same year in 2024, we had the chance to be able to send the first national satellite that was developed under several institutions coming together in Turkey with the solely Turkish mindset, mind power, as well as 81% domestic hardware that we used on that platform. That was important, which carried us into such a great statistic like Republic of Turkey has been the 11th nation among all the other nations, which is 193 in total, to have its communication satellite capability up in GEO. That was a really important step in our accomplishments. Next coming up is the spaceport project that was unveiled by our president. That is going to provide one of the golden key in the hands of Turkey, not only for our needs and capacity building, but for the humanity's next step and future plans to go up to the space. As you have already witnessed, the humanity is switching and changing gear to the next level in the space arena. After 54 years, Artemis missions have already been started, which is going to continue for the next exploration phases. Within the last 70 years of human exploration up in space, one of the biggest problems in terms of capacity is where all the journey is starting, which is on Earth with the launch capacities. When you put all the necessities, requirements for a space launch operation and hit the button, you come up with among the whole world's geographical capacity with 2 different locations in the whole world, with the most optimum conditions to build a spaceport. Right now, the Republic of Turkey building in one of them, which cannot even be compared to the other one which has already been used, which is the French Guiana, up in the northeast of South America. Once we complete this project, which is among one out of 10 goals in our national program, we are going to reach out to a really key capacity and skill to be able to build up space ecosystem here on Earth. Next, we have to invest in, with this great momentum that we have gained together with our Turkish astronaut and scientific mission, more into the microgravity research programs that has been executed in our universities and research institutes. We already have a great momentum in terms of that, and the self-confidence that we have gained together with the 13 experiments added by 7 in your flights, Tuba, in order to lead this great aspiration and momentum to keep going for the coming days. Plus, we need to encourage our industry to be a part of the world's space ecosystem. As Michael has also mentioned, this is not solely a single mission that needed to be executed and forgotten in the past. We just we we didn't only execute a 22 days long mission. We have created a really great self-confidence which is going to trigger and support for the future aspiration of the people in different aspects of space. And we have already been using this energy in order to encourage all those industry partners and letting our players in the game, in this whole game set, to come over and see our capacity, what we have here. In some of the capacities, we weren't even fully aware what we can manage to succeed. We know how capable we are in aviation and defense, and now it's time to adapt that capacity into the space arena. Plus, we need to just, keep going with all these outreach events to unveil all those, curtains in front of the dreams of our youth generation, so we can create a real pipeline which is going to sustain this energy for our future projects.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for
You're
your
welcome.
very detailed answer. Thank you. And Marcus, you get the last question. So you were really busy while on orbit, right? You had a lot of experiments supported and created by ESA on AX-3, which included investigations such as surface avatar robotic operations, right? You had brain DTI scanning measurements, some cardiovascular deconditioning investigations, and orbital architecture, how we can use technologies like virtual reality to mitigate some of the psychological impacts of being in an isolated environment for astronauts in the next couple of years, and other human performance studies. So which experiments most change your view when it comes to how humans are going to operate on, let's say, lunar surfaces or Martian bases when implementing certain robotic operations? Which experiment that you conducted on board ISS informed your views when it comes to those future-looking operations that we are going to conduct as a humanity?
Yeah, thank you, Tuva. That's also a great question. So when it comes to the robotics, then Surface Avatar, which was controlling a set of robots, we was on a simulated Mars environment on Earth, and we controlled those from the space station. High-level commands, low-level commands, and when I say that, I mean high-level command would be telling one or several robots or avatars to go and do a task, and then they do that autonomously. Or low level, where you're really controlling an arm. And there are several different parts of this. One is to do the operation from a technological perspective, but then there's also the effect from microgravity on your fine-tuning with the muscles and how you control that, and whether you need to attach or if you can just free float. If you need to attach, you have to bring more weight and equipment, so a lot of those things in there, which is difficult or almost impossible to simulate on Earth. So that learned a lot when it came to robotics. When it comes to the environment and building space stations or lunar bases or Mars in the future, I would say the orbital architecture part, where we tested how my performance was affected throughout different parts of the station, whether I could see Earth or not, or I was in a different noise environment, or whether I was floating or not. Did tests on the computer at the same time as we did measurements on my brain activity and stress levels, and also sleep testing with EEG. And that, first of all, it taught me, or it showed the effect or no effect of different environments, which tells us a little bit about how much effort we should put into making a really clean station, or whether we can have a more technological approach to making it convenient to use. When doing that, I asked myself a lot of subjective questions, like how does it feel to be here on the station? And I asked myself, what if we just accelerate the ISS right now and we go to Mars and then back, which would mean 3 years round trip? How would I feel with those 3 years inside of this station right now? And it was interesting, because it was a very nice environment. It was nice to be there, nice to work there. And I asked myself why it didn't feel confined, because it's not very big. It's quite spacious, but still not very big. And I think that was because of the difference in the different modules. to me, that was important. It was like a small world where you went to one module, you felt like you had gone to another small world and back and forth. So when it comes to the question which of the test and the research had most impact from that perspective, I think it was that one because it triggered a lot of questions. And then when it comes to being in that environment, as mentioned earlier, we were 11 crew members on board with 9 different nationalities representing 7 different countries. It's quite a mix of both culture and backgrounds and nationalities. But it's very clear, as mentioned earlier, that the purpose and the mission and the desire and will to move or expand the envelope or our human reality, that was very common to all of us. And I think, and this might sound a bit poetic, but if we're supposed to be cooperating and collaborating above the borders where we normally don't, I think making that off-planet kind of makes sense. Because when we're out there, it becomes very obvious that we are not only 11. We're very proud and very representing our countries strongly, so don't get that wrong. But we're 11 human beings from planet Earth. And I think that was very strong. To me, that was very strong, also having the background I have. And you can sense that really strongly. So when it comes to how to design and whether or not you can be in a vehicle like this with totally different backgrounds and cultures, that's very, very doable, and I would enjoy that a lot. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So we have very little time, but is there any burning questions? Is anyone thinking like, I need to ask this right now? Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Hello.
And from the, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but from the crew members, brief emphasis if possible. Yeah. Please.
Hello. This is Emin speaking. Welcome. We are so pleased to have you here. I have 2 short questions for MLA. As an aerospace engineer from Middle East Technical University, I'm curious about our collaboration and our scope. If you may give brief information about what we're going to do together, I'd be so glad. Secondly, about space research and development perspective, and including whole Earth. Is there anything that you find unnecessary? Or if it was you to start a new project, what would it be? Thank you.
It's a very complex question, the last one. I don't know that I could answer it briefly. Look, I think what probably strikes all of us is that the ISS is a magnificent machine, but it's quite outdated from a technology standpoint. It's when you want to communicate with the ground, you have to physically put on a headset or a microphone, be near a speaker, make sure nobody else is talking. I mean, these are things in 2026 we probably shouldn't have to deal with. So I think the things that are unnecessary are nuisances that technology just hasn't caught up. And you can see that it's logical because this vehicle was, put together literally starting in the 1990s with probably 1980s technology. I think the processes are actually 486s, if that means anything to you. So, and the problem is it's difficult to change it because the ISS wasn't really made with modernization in mind. So that's a big lesson learned that we're taking on Axiom Station. Regarding the cooperation with Middle East Technical University, so this is, I mentioned a little bit before, but it is a global alliance with universities throughout the world. So Turkey and METU is just the latest of the addition to it, and we want to keep adding. But the idea is to use the benefit of having all of those universities working together to advance broadly microgravity research. So a lot of these universities have their own programs, and I know METU has one as well. But let's say METU can work with a university in the United States, like let's say Purdue, or someone in Italy or Sweden. So these ideas are to basically just get synergies from a bigger group of universities to work together. And I think then take those ideas and then bring them back to the nations that those universities are from and help foment research ideas organically, matching what the capabilities are for vehicles in space with what the desires are at a national level to conduct research, whether it's in biopharma or if it's in advanced materials or whatever it is. But microgravity is a very untapped resource, I think, in terms of investigation. It's just a question of figuring out what those common themes could be, and the best way to do that is to get all the smart minds working on it together. Thank you.
Any other burning question? One last one, and you're going to be the last question
Hi,
of the panel.
Burak is speaking from Istanbul Technical University. I see the pilot's background, and I really need to ask this question. So when do we expect a loyal wingman for the astronauts to go on a spacewalk with a space robot helping them out to conduct some complex tasks like maintenance or refueling or even upgrading a telescope? And my second question is, would that be also possible for this crew to take the initiative to maybe lead a proposal or a call that local universities collaborating with maybe Swedish, Italian, or American universities to conduct some experiments aboard International Space Station to test their own GNC algorithms with the Astro B robots that is already aboard the station? Thank you.
Anyone who wants to take this? Maybe the second question is more towards the agency heads and the institution heads, but you might take the first question. When we're going to see a robotic sort of helper?
I just want to say something and need to actually pass the word to Michael. He's the real expert to be able to answer that question, but you pinpointed a really very key point, key issue. Loyal wingman concept is right now heavily being integrated into the aviation, especially the military aviation war concepts. And right now, stemming from this, I think Michael has something to say about the space operations.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, first of all, we're doing it in a very primitive way already. We have a remote manipulator system, robotic arm that has a dexterous end that can do some tasks now that until previously the EVA crew members were having to do it. But it has a long way to go to get to where you're referring to with the loyal wingman thing. And I think it's a great area of investigation because honestly, if it's being done here on Earth, then it should absolutely be explored in space. And it's just a question of getting the funds and the ideas together and doing it. So I love that idea.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. This essentially wraps up our panel. But before we close, crew, thank you very much for being part of this mission, this historic mission. You did not just go on an adventure, but you contributed meaningfully to science and really expanded, as you were saying, Marcus, our collective understanding as a human species. So thank you very much for all of your efforts and also sacrifices, right? This is not just a joyride, but it takes a real sacrifice as well. We, as the rest of the human beings who are lucky enough to be traveling in space on board this spaceship that we call Earth, thank you very much. Thank you.
Tuva, I have to say, first of all, you did all of the sacrifice and got none of the fun on orbit, although the suborbital flight I'm sure was great. But thank you for the very detailed and very well thought out preparation for the panel. I think you represented the different backgrounds in a superb way, and we're very in gratitude for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We would like to thank to our moderator and our panelists for sharing this extraordinary and inspiring mission experiences. And now to commemorate today, we kindly invite Mr. Levent Kerim Uça, the Secretary General of Al Saha Istanbul, to the stage for present our gifts to the moderator and panelists.